Welcome to the Engine channel. Today we'll disassemble an engine that many of you likely already recognize. I'll reveal what kind it is shortly. This case will be unique, as I haven't seen anything like it before in my experience. This is the ZMZ-523, the Pazovskaya modification of the legendary ZMZ-511 engine. It's a V-shaped engine. 8 cylinders, displacement of 1 gallon 130 horsepower, 3.622 inches bore diameter. Displacement is 1 gallon 130 horsepower, 3.622 inches bore diameter. More detailed technical specifications will appear on the screen now. So, this engine was taken from a PA-Z3205 bus. Everyone knows what it looks like, but now I'll put up a photo. Here it is. What is unique about our case today? And the uniqueness is that this engine has run 1 million kilometers. Well, give or take, roughly speaking, about 10%, but let's say it's approximately 1 million kilometers. Now I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this engine. So this bus is a PA-Z3205 from 2006, and accordingly the engine is also from 2006. And it worked for 14 years, so now it's 2020, and the engine worked for 14 years without any repairs, without a major overhaul. That is, well, I mean a major overhaul. Nobody touched the camshaft, crankshaft bearings, piston group, piston, cylinder liner, rings, and so on. Maybe some gaskets were replaced, like the gaskets under the plate, the so-called intake manifold, or for example valve covers, gaskets, maybe even the cylinder head gaskets were replaced, or the cylinder block and so on. So there was some minimal repair, of course. All this time it was working on one route, driving around villages, and almost all this time it was driven by the same driver. When the engine was removed, I spoke with the driver, gathered all the details, and documented everything to ensure I could provide an accurate account later on. The 2006 engine was mainly used for village driving with a daily mileage of around 217 miles. So, 350 kilometers, and his work schedule was 5 days on, 2 days off. So, if you calculate it, that's about 1,750 kilometers per week. His total mileage ended up being 90. Multiply 1,000 per year by 14 years, and you get 1,275,000 kilometers. During that period, he couldn't work daily due to occasional downtimes for various reasons. He didn't actually drive 1,275 0 miles, but roughly speaking, there's definitely 1 million kilometers on it. Let's stop there, because 1 million kilometers is such a beautiful number, especially for an engine like this. In my opinion, that's simply fantastic. So that's what makes this case unique. Well, as far as I know, I've been working with all kinds of bus engines for over 20 years now, and as far as I can say, judging by my own experience, these kinds of engines usually last. Well, that's about 250 to 300,000 kilometers, well, at most, maybe up to 400,000. But those are already kind of rare cases. Clearly, this engine is not a Mercedes, and comparing them is pointless. Achieving 1 million kilometers with this engine is an exceptional one-off feat. I'm just sharing my opinion from my own experience. So, I'm really interested to see what's inside. I can't wait to take it apart and see what's inside, what condition the parts of the piston group are in, the crankshaft, the camshaft, and so on, the bearings. Usually the main bearing journals on the crankshaft suffer. That is, you take apart the engine, it has say 300,000 kilometers on it, and the crankshaft already has so much wear that, for example, it's not always possible to grind it down for the next repair. There was a standard size, but grinding it down to 0.25 wasn't always possible. Sometimes the repair size had to be skipped and go straight to 0.50. And here, if you consider that with a mileage of 1 million kilometers, I'm even afraid to imagine what condition the crankshaft is in, and so on. Since the bus is constantly in use, always on the route, there shouldn't be any downtime for the bus. I made a replacement engine, meaning we took another engine, I overhauled it, and then the bus was out of service for repairs for just a few days. They removed this engine, brought it to my workshop, installed it, and put in another engine. So, this was the minimum downtime for the bus before removal. After just a month or two, the driver began telling me it was no longer possible to drive the vehicle. So it's burning oil, burning fuel. There's no power at all, meaning the engine doesn't run, the oil pressure has dropped. Plus the engine runs unevenly, meaning it shakes. Well, it was decided to measure the compression, and I measured the compression on it about 2 months before the engine was removed, and the compression was already below the minimum acceptable limits. That is, in some cylinders there were about 6 or 7 atmospheres in general. It didn't even reach 8. I think there wasn't 8 in any of the cylinders, but I clearly remember that 2 cylinders were already at 0. The compression was practically 0. With such an engine, the driver managed to drive for around 2 months. The engine we have is the ZMZ-523, which is the past modification of the ZMZ-511. This engine is more powerful than the ZMZ-511. How did they achieve the increased power of this engine? So, first they moved the crank pin further from the main journal, that is, they increased the stroke. So that's the first thing. And second, they reduced the height of the piston, meaning the distance from the piston crown to the piston pin was made smaller. Because of this, at top dead center the piston remains in the same position, but at bottom dead center it goes a bit further down. As a result, the cylinder volume increased. That is, in general, if the ZMZ-511 engine has 1 gallon and 1 quart, then the ZMZ-523 has 1 gallon. So we can see that it increased by almost 0.845 cups, and accordingly the piston stroke increased. For the ZMZ-511 it's 3.15 inches, and for the ZMZ-523 it's 3.46 inches. As a result, the piston stroke and engine displacement increased. The displacement, but the compression ratio was kept at 7.6. Later, when I disassemble the engine, I'll explain how and why this choice was made. Well, in a nutshell, on the ZMZ-511 engine, the piston crown is just flat, but on this engine, the piston crown has a small recess. The cylinder volume has increased, and we've slightly enlarged the combustion chamber, but in the end, the compression ratio has remained the same. The ZMZ-511 and ZMZ-523 have interchangeable cylinder heads and engine blocks. Well, in general, there's a lot in common here. The only difference is the crankshaft and pistons. Even the sleeves, the piston rings, and the connecting rods are the same. The only thing is the crankshaft and pistons. I'll show this moment when I later take it apart in more detail. So, it turns out they increased the engine power, got plus 10 horsepower, plus 20 newton meters of torque, but as a result, this engine ended up with shorter pistons. As a result, the piston began experiencing greater loads. And since the skirt became shorter, that means accordingly the loads are higher, but the support area is smaller. The lower the piston, it turns out, the faster it fails, the more the skirt suffers, the more load it experiences, and so on. That's the kind of engine. That's the kind of unique case, as I already mentioned in my practice. This is the first time I've seen something like this. Well, at least I couldn't remember anything similar. So I'm personally interested to see what's inside, what condition the engine is in, the parts, and so on. Well, I think you'll also be interested to see it, so this is just a small insert. By the video's end, you could say my engine is disassembled. I've seen everything, the condition, what happened, and how it happened. This engine is truly one of a kind. I've never encountered anything similar. Watch the full video to see it all for yourself. Now, the first thing I do is check the oil. I look to see if there's any oil in it. If there is, I drain it. And then I'll be mounting the engine on the stand. That is, I won't be disassembling it on the table, but I have a special stand for that. The engine has existed since the Soviet era, and its future is currently uncertain. For now, we'll disassemble it, inspect it for defects, and assess its condition by checking what's inside and how things are. And later, a decision will be made. Either it will be reassembled as a spare engine, or it will simply be inspected for defects. The usable parts will be kept as spares, and the ones that are no longer usable will be scrapped. Currently, the task involves disassembling it, inspecting for defects, and evaluating its condition. So we can see that the oil has already been drained. Apparently when the engine was removed from the bus, the oil was drained while it was still on the bus. That's actually good. That means things are good for us. It has drained out. Now apparently some has collected at the bottom while it was sitting. We'll wait for it to finish draining, so we'll have less mess when we take it apart. We can also see that the engine is already partially disassembled. That is, there's no oil filter, no exhaust manifolds, no drive, and so on. There is no clutch at all. Something was removed and then put back on the bus. So, this is the kind of stand it is. In this way, it's simply attached with nuts. Where the gearbox is mounted, it's fixed to the stand with the same nuts, and you can rotate it in any direction. It's quite convenient, remnants of Soviet luxury. Let's start disassembling. First, remove the valve covers, rocker arm plate and cylinder heads, essentially taking apart the top part. Let's begin, friends. Also, let me remind you that some parts were partially swapped onto the spare engine. That's why there are no nuts here. Throttle rods and various brackets are attached. There's no pump, for example. That's why it's already partially disassembled. I unscrewed the nuts, removed the washers and nuts. Let's see. Anyone who works on these engines and cylinder heads, those familiar know that repeatedly removing the cylinder head causes these aluminum spots to get pressed in. That is, they get pressed inward, this part here, the stud gets squeezed, plus the edges get crushed like this, meaning they get flattened out. We can see the condition of this cylinder head. It looks almost like new here. That is, it's a strict 90 degrees, no dents, nothing at all. So the condition of the head is just perfect. This suggests that they probably weren't even removed at all. But if they were, maybe just once. In my opinion, they weren't removed at all. The condition is just perfect. These are the spots where the washer goes and the nut presses down through the washer. Alright, that's it. Now I take the pry bar, gently lift the head and remove it. Let's see, this is an interesting moment. I'm taking it off, let's see what we'll find in there. I struggled with these for sure. This shows the engine hasn't been taken apart in 14 years. I haven't seen cylinder heads this difficult to remove in a long time. I even had to pry them off with mounting tools. Of course, I did leave a few scratches and dents here and there, but that's okay. Later, if I work on them with the machine, I'll clean them up. So you can see that the cylinder heads have never been ground. It feels like they've never been on a machine, and it's clear they've never been removed before. because there's so much carbon buildup. You can see the oxidation of the carbon on these studs. We can see it right here. The excessive carbon buildup and oxidation caused everything to hold together like a monolith. Honestly, the gasket is in such poor condition that it's barely recognizable as a gasket anymore. This isn't even a proper gasket. It's really strange how it was still running. So, apparently it's just falling apart into pieces. Can you see what's happening with the gasket? After letting it sit, the carbon buildup is now visible. It has separated from the cylinder heads from the pistons. I don't see any signs of a burnt piston or anything else yet. Yeah, because right now you can't see anything at all. All you can see here is solid dirt, carbon buildup, and so on. Let's take a look at the cylinder heads. We can also see carbon buildup in some places, forming a visible layer. The cylinders seem to be working and these two are okay, but this one wasn't working at all based on the exhaust valve color. This one wasn't working at all. So we have 6 cylinders here, 5, 6. We'll pay special attention to the 6th cylinder when we take it apart. So now let's look at 1, 2, 3, 4. Also, the condition of the gasket is about the same. It's just falling apart into pieces. Same here. I somehow managed to remove this head. As you can see here, I just disconnected everything. And also, if we look here, we can see that water got in. The 3rd cylinder, as you can see, is all rusty. But for now, I don't see any pistons that are completely burned through. Alright, let's not guess. For now, we need to take them out and then we'll be able to see, well, we removed all the heads. Now the next steps are to unscrew the ratchet, remove the hub, and take off the front cover. No, I'll start the engine and take off the oil pan first. So I've unscrewed all the oil pan nuts. I didn't clean the dirt, but that's fine. I'm removing the oil pan to see what's inside the engine crankcase. So well, let's take a look. We can see, of course, everything is covered in deposits. There's a smell of burnt oil, because gases from the combustion chamber were leaking into the crankcase. That's why there's such a strong smell of burnt oil here. Over there, we can see some kind of emulsion. This likely occurred post-removal, although not entirely certain. Water may have already been entering the oil pan, as all gaskets were rotten. So, let's take a look here. Of course, everything is dirty here too. We haven't found anything serious so far. We'll continue disassembling it. We're now removing the ratchet, unscrewing it, taking off the hub, front cover, and the oil pickup. A miracle didn't happen, the hub didn't come off by hand. So now we'll set up the puller and remove the hub. I unscrewed it, removed the front hub, and now I'm taking off the front cover. By the way, the oil seal is still a little soft. I thought it would be completely hard, but it's actually still a bit soft. Okay, next I'll unscrew the rear main cover, which acts as the oil seal. So there's a packing seal there and 2 rubber flags. So it's held in place by 2 hex nuts. We're getting to the most interesting part. Next, we'll remove the connecting rods and pistons. Okay, so it looks like I've taken out the first one. I've taken out the first cylinder, and let's take a look. The skirt is in good condition on one side, but has some scoring on the other side. It's not as bad as expected. Well, we can see that there's a lot of carbon buildup. Now I'll take out all the pistons and remove the rings. I'll measure them directly in the cylinder and see what condition they're in. Well, the bearing, at least the connecting rod one, is in satisfactory condition. Let's say that. As for the main bearings, we'll check those as well. So I've taken out the first piston. Now I'm taking out the rest from this side, the second, third and fourth. Alright, so I've taken out the second cylinder, the piston of the second cylinder. And we can see that basically. Well, basically we don't really see any major mess here. That is, well, obviously the rings are worn out, the oil control ring is a bit stuck, apparently it doesn't move, and it's almost completely worn out. The skirt on one side is worn down, scraped, and scoring has started. So therefore, we'll look specifically at the valve head of the second cylinder. Maybe the reason for the lack of compression is in the valves. We've removed the second cylinder. Let's continue. Alright, we've taken everything out. We can also see that everything is in about the same condition. There's one more thing I want to show. I've been wanting to point out for a while the position of the piston rings after you take them out of the cylinder. So right now I've taken out the piston, I haven't turned anything yet, and we can see the oil control ring. The lock is at the top for us, so if we hold it like this, it's at the top, but if you look at how the engine is positioned, then it's actually at the bottom. And now let's look at the position of the locks on the compression rings. We rotate it and see that they have just lined up. They're both in the same place. So this is about when you're assembling the engine and installing the rings. Some people say you have to strictly stagger them. I agree, yes, you can stagger them and you probably should, but it's not really that critically important. That's just my view. Even if I put all the rings like this, with all the gaps lined up in a row, it really doesn't have much effect on the engine's performance. That's just my opinion, because when the engine is running, the rings simply rotate back and forth like this. They don't stay in one place, they don't stay lined up. And here's clear proof of that. Well, I also said that the compression ratio of this engine remained the same, even though the total cylinder volume increased. Because of what? We can see that the piston has a recess, meaning that if on the 511 the piston just has a flat top, then on the 523 the piston has a recess. That is, by doing this they increased the combustion chamber and accordingly compensated for the cylinder volume with a larger combustion chamber volume, and as a result they got the same compression ratio. 76, that's it. I've taken out this side. Now I turn the engine over and take out 5 through 8. Of course I wanted to find some real mess, like a piston completely shattered, partitions fallen out, everything burned through, but so far there's nothing like that. I expected that when I started taking it apart, that's exactly what I'd find happening. Let's remember, the engine has done 1,000,000 kilometers, so for now it looks pretty decent. So, about the piston ring gap, I've taken it out, but I haven't rotated it yet. The 3 gaps are in nearly the same position with a difference of about 30 degrees. The piston and everything else in this engine are in normal condition. Let's continue disassembling it. The piston has gaps spaced about 120 degrees apart. The ring is an oil scraper ring. We can see that these ridges are practically gone, it's just smooth now. I've removed 6 pistons so far and haven't noticed any significant damage. That is, well, it's clear the wear is even, but there's a lot of wear. That's what we expected. I didn't expect to capture that kind of content myself. Here the pistons, everything is falling apart, I don't know, but here in principle everything is more or less in good condition. I'll remove 2 pistons, the crankshaft and the cylinder head. Let's see what happens. I unscrewed the nuts from the main caps, took off the nuts, removed the washers, and pried off the caps because they're really hard to get off. I'm wondering if any mechanics or experienced drivers remember how it used to be right here. The thread was cut at an angle, and a ring was screwed in, so you could pry it off using that ring. Old engines were done that way, but modern ones use a different method. And that's why it's sometimes very difficult to pry these covers out of there. You have to wiggle it like this. Wiggle it and slowly take it out. I've lifted all the covers, but I haven't looked yet. Now we'll take out the covers and check the condition of the bearings and the condition of the crankshaft. I've removed the covers to inspect it. Of course, the bearing here is damaged. We can see there are already some inclusions, shavings, scoring, and you can tell it's all worn and rounded off. Yes, the bearings are severely damaged. Yes, as I said, the engine we have is unique. It's a unique case. That's actually what happened. I didn't expect this much wear and mess everywhere. It ended up being unique differently than anticipated. The engine has gone 1,000,000 kilometers and is in this condition. I'm at a loss. This is actually an exception to the rule for such engines. Well, even judging by the oil, you can see that the oil, well, it wasn't the best oil. You can see the kind of deposits, the kind of buildup there is. And yet the condition is just, well, I don't know, it amazes me. Okay, next I'll take out the camshaft and start knocking out the sleeves. So there is some wear, but actually it's not as huge as I expected. But still I won't be reusing the sleeves. In any case, I knock out the sleeves, I don't need them anymore. And I also take out the distributor. So well, that's how I knocked out the sleeves, and basically that's it. The block is already empty now. Essentially, there's nothing left for me to take apart. Well, I could also remove the oil pump, but basically I won't take it off right now. There's nothing particularly interesting for us to see there. Once again, I expected something different, and thought I'd find something when I disassembled it. It could have been much worse here, but as it turned out, everything here is actually very... Basically, it's actually not bad at all for that kind of mileage. I'll say it again, 1,000,000 kilometers. Why is it like that? Well, I can't explain it. Most likely this is an exception to the rule. It's just that this engine happened to be of such high quality. Well, maybe the driver also played a role, because the driver was experienced, he's already retired. So maybe that also played a part, how he drove, how he operated it, how he took care of it, and so on. So that's another explanation I have. Well, because I just don't know how else to explain something like this, that everything is in such good condition with such high mileage. Maybe the driver used some oil additives, but that's not certain. Again, that's just my assumption. But this version, it seems to me, is more plausible. That the driver is simply experienced, has worked his whole life on these buses. And he just drives carefully, doesn't overwork it, doesn't abuse the engine, and also takes good care of it. Well, plus there's also luck. The engine itself turned out to be a really good one. That's all the assumptions I have. Now, I'll also turn it over and we'll see how much scale has built up under the sleeves. So, as we can see, after all these years, there's this kind of layer here. There's already a buildup of all sorts of scale and deposits. As we can see, oxidation of the block has already started there. This is the kind of layer that is, well, it's clear that in a year or two you wouldn't get this much scale buildup, especially since nowadays our cars mostly run on antifreeze, not water. And for such an amount of deposits to build up, of course, a lot of time has to pass. So regarding the crankshaft, basically there is some wear, but it's actually quite minor. I assume the crankshaft will be within the standard size. But now, I'll wipe it down and measure it again, of course. I'll take a micrometer and measure it. Well, as for the camshaft here, of course things aren't so good anymore. The very top of the cam lobe has started to crumble, so we won't be using this camshaft anymore. Well, also, if we look at the tappets, we can see that some of them are chipped as well. Here's one and here's another. Next, let's look at the bearings. Well, the condition of the bearings is of course bad, while the bearings are normal. There's a symbol and that's it. We don't have any other markings here. No numbers, no other identifying signs. Now I'll take out the rings from one of the pistons and install them in the cylinder to check the gaps, and I'll also start disassembling the cylinder heads. I've installed the piston rings into the cylinder liner and checked the gap. It's about 0.118 inches or more. This is our first compression ring, this is our second compression ring, and this is our oil control ring. We can see gaps of approximately 3/1/6 of an inch. Also, if we look at the sleeves, we can see that there are just these buildups here, like corals that have grown in the sea over decades. And the gaskets, they've just grown into the sleeves as well. It's just impossible to remove them. Well, and this is the condition of the pistons. We can see the scoring on the skirts, and this is how they look. The bearings also show scoring, and there are shavings and so on in the mounts. The wear is visually apparent with the component eaten away to a semicircular rounded shape. This is the appearance of the tappets and crankshaft as well. So next, now we take the micrometer, a micrometer from 50 to 75. I checked and calibrated it against the standard. So basically we set it to 60 millimeters and start by measuring the connecting rod journals. That is, I want to measure the crankshaft's connecting rod journal, the main journals, to see what the wear is, to express it in some value, in some number. So first we measure the connecting rod journals. The standard is 600, so we set it to 60 and measure the first connecting rod journal. So we see the size is 5,990, well, almost 98, 97 and a half. So that's still within the acceptable range. Within the limits, a minus of up to 200 is allowed. Next, we measure the second connecting rod journal. The second connecting rod journal is 59.98. The third connecting rod journal is 59.98. The fourth connecting rod journal is also 97.5. Now we set the micrometer to 70 millimeters. The main journals have a standard of 70 millimeters, the first main journal. The size is 69.98, which should be within the standard size and may not require grinding. Let's measure the second main journal. 69.98. The third main journal is 69.97.5. The fourth main journal is 69.97. 5 main journal 6,996. As we can see, the last 4 or 5 main journals already show some signs of wear. That is, the limit is up to 98. One has 97, the other has 96. Well, you can grind it for the first repair 1,000,000 kilometers and it's still in this condition. So I already gave an explanation before, I have nothing more to add. So moving on, I took one Giza. Now we'll measure it, the inner diameter, to understand what kind of wear we have here. Now I'll set up the inside micrometer and measure it. So now we need to measure the inner diameter of the Giza. For this we take the inside micrometer, take the attachment. We know the size is 92, so we take the attachment from 90 to 100. We've increased the micrometer from 75 to 100. We set it to 92 millimeters and also checked it with the standard, set it to 92 millimeters. And now we insert our internal micrometer here. This way we find the center and set it to 0 on the dial indicator. I've adjusted it already. 0 is precisely 3.622 inches for us. Our internal micrometer is now set up. Now we go and measure the cylinder like this. Insert it, lower it almost to the end and look. I'll show you. This is our 0. We look, here we have somewhere about 7/100ths. We raise it somewhere to the middle of the cylinder and we see. Here we have wear, about 0.08. And now we raise it to the very top, where we have the most wear. We see here we have 0 wear. A full 2/10. Now we turn the cylinder 90 degrees and check. Well, at 90 degrees here it's already a little less. The wear is about 0.16. In the middle of the cylinder it's already 11/100ths, and at the very bottom it's about the same, 8/100ths. So the amount of wear on the cylinder is 2/10. Obviously these cylinders can no longer be used for 1,000,000 kilometers. I'll repeat once again, this is a very small amount of wear. So now we take the micrometers and measure the piston skirt. As we can see, the diameter of the skirt is 91.96. The wear on the piston is approximately 500th or half a tenth, which is not significant. Just a small clarification in general. So, sometimes in the video I say that the engine's condition is very good, and other times I say that the engine's condition is very bad. Let me clarify a bit. In short, I mean that the engine's condition is good for this kind of mileage. Everything is relative. If this engine had 20,000 miles, its condition would have been terrible. But if we're talking about engines with 1,000,000 kilometers on them, then for us that's just an excellent engine condition, relatively speaking. So all I have left is to take apart the cylinder heads, adjust the valves, and check the condition of the valves. That's it. The low compression is caused by wear on the cylinder liner and rings. I'm currently adjusting the valves. I'm disassembling the cylinder head and inspecting it. And we can see that, for example, on this cylinder, the one that wasn't working, we see that the exhaust valve is completely covered in carbon deposits. There was a lot of oil in the cylinder because the rings are worn out. Excessive carbon buildup was being ejected through the exhaust valve, causing it to clog. Consequently, the valve wasn't closing tightly or sealing properly. As a result, there was no compression. I disassembled the second head and found the situation to be similar to the first. There are no burnt valves or valve seats, but there is a significant amount of carbon buildup with pieces of carbon falling out. Well, and what is all this caused by? All this is due to high mileage, significant wear on the rings. As a result, the rings started letting oil through. The oil burns in the cylinders and carbon buildup forms. Well, that's what the assumption was, that's what I supposed, but how will it actually turn out? I said we need to take it apart, and then we'll see everything. So we took it apart and saw for ourselves. So, what else do I want to say? As I said at the beginning, that's exactly how it turned out. This engine is truly unique. I couldn't have assumed that an engine from that year with such mileage would be in this condition. And maybe in such condition. So basically that's everything I wanted to show, I've shown. I also want to remind you and show once again the statistics on views on my channel. At the time of editing, I don't know what it will be, but at the time of filming about 75% watched without subscribing and 25% watched with a subscription. So I'll ask again, a few videos ago I asked in a video, I brought up this topic about subscribing. And basically it gave its results. That is, I immediately had a jump in subscribers. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. If you regularly watch my videos but aren't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. I'm not talking about just watching one popular episode, but if you're a regular viewer, please subscribe. That is, it doesn't really obligate you to anything. You just press the button and that's it. You could say you forget about it. And for the channel, I'll say it again. It means a lot. I'll repeat, my goal right now is to reach 100,000 subscribers and get the silver button from... So before, when I started this channel, I didn't even think about it. I just didn't consider it because, well, how could my channel possibly reach 100,000 subscribers? Now that I have 60,000 subscribers, I can see it's possible. So my new goal is 100,000 subscribers. That's why I'm asking everyone who watches my video to click the subscribe button. Basically, it doesn't obligate you to anything. But for my channel and for me personally, it's a big help. About comments, as I've already said, just write any comment. It doesn't matter if it's on topic or not. Letters and emojis. That's all that's needed for video promotion and algorithms. So once again, please subscribe, like, leave a comment and share the video. All of this is very important for the channel and for me personally. So this video will just be a single episode. It won't be a series. It'll just be a one episode kind of film. I likely won't reassemble this engine after disassembling it. That's the initial info. Reassembly is doubtful. If of course there is an assembly, then I'll film more episodes about the assembly and I'll have a continuation. About this engine. Well, for now I'll be finishing this video. This is how the video turned out and this is how the engine disassembly turned out. Thanks for watching. Good luck to all. Goodbye.